I'm Lauren Anderson, 34, and I once believed family meant unconditional support. 10 years of double shifts, brown bag lunches, and saying no to vacations finally paid off when I bought my modest 3-bedroom house in Springfield. I sent 20 personalized invitations for my housewarming, expecting at least my parents and siblings would come. Instead, my mother's text message shattered everything. "Don't expect us to come, your house isn't worth it." Standing alone in my decorated living room, I realized some wounds cut deeper than others. Let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button while I tell you how I rebuilt more than just a home. I grew up in the wealthy Anderson family where success was measured in square footage and zip codes. My parents, Thomas and Eleanor Anderson, built their fortune in commercial real estate development, transforming our small Midwestern city one luxury property at a time. Our family home was a sprawling 6-bedroom colonial in Lakeside Estates, the most exclusive neighborhood in town, where even the mailboxes screamed wealth and privilege. From an early age, I sensed I was different from the rest of my family. While my parents hosted lavish dinner parties with business associates and local politicians, I preferred curling up with a book or helping our housekeeper Martha in the kitchen. My mother would find me there, flour on my nose, and sigh dramatically. "Lauren, darling, we have staff for a reason," she'd say, guiding me back to proper activities for an Anderson daughter like piano lessons or cotillion practice. My brother Aaron, 2 years older, embraced the family legacy enthusiastically. He mimicked our father, walking with the same confident stride and practicing firm handshakes in the mirror. By high school, he already had business cards reading "future attorney" and joined every club that would look impressive on college applications. My sister Jessica, 3 years younger, was our mother's perfect project. Beautiful and socially adept, she understood the power of appearances from the moment she could walk. Together, they planned Jessica's debutante ball when she was just 14, 3 years before the actual event. I was the middle child, the odd one out. While I did well in school, my interests never aligned with family expectations. The defining moment came during my senior year of high school, when college decisions arrived. "Law, business, or medicine," my father announced at dinner one evening. "Those are the acceptable paths for an Anderson." I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. "I want to study education. I want to teach." The silence that followed was absolute. My mother set down her fork, my father's face darkened, and even Aaron paused mid-bite. "Teaching." My father finally broke the silence with a dismissive laugh. "That's glorified babysitting, Lauren. You're an Anderson." "I'm good with children," I countered. "I love seeing that moment when something clicks for them. You can donate to educational charities when you're successful," my mother offered as though it were a reasonable compromise. But I held firm, perhaps the first time I truly stood my ground with my family. I attended State University on a partial scholarship supplemented by my parents, who made it clear this was a disappointment, but wouldn't have their daughter at a budget school regardless. Family gatherings during college became battlegrounds. My parents introduced Aaron as "our son, the future attorney," and Jessica as "our youngest pre-med at Northwestern." I was simply Lauren, our middle child. During my sophomore year, Aaron landed an internship at a prestigious law firm. My parents threw him a party complete with imported champagne and a custom ice sculpture of scales of justice. When I secured my first student teaching position at a struggling elementary school, my announcement was met with polite nods, before the conversation quickly shifted to Jessica's perfect SAT scores. By graduation, the pattern was clear. My teaching degree was acknowledged with a dinner at a nice but not extravagant restaurant. 2 weeks later, Aaron graduated from law school, and my parents rented out the entire country club for his celebration. "That's what we do for significant achievements," my mother explained when I questioned the disparity. The words stung more than she could know. At 24, I moved out of my parents' home and into a tiny apartment in a part of town the Andersons never visited. It was a 3rd-floor walk-up with temperamental plumbing and a kitchenette barely big enough for a mini-fridge, but it was mine. My father called it throwing money away on rent, and offered to buy me a condo in a suitable neighborhood instead. No strings attached. he promised, though we both knew better. I declined. That same month, I watched him purchase Jessica her first house as a medical school graduation gift. It was 3 times the size of what a single person needed in a neighborhood filled with successful physicians and executives. The contrast wasn't lost on me, nor was the message it sent some achievements were worth celebrating, others weren't. Some choices merited investment, others didn't. During a particularly tense Thanksgiving dinner that year, after enduring hours of Aaron describing his latest high-profile case and Jessica detailing her prestigious residency match, I announced my plan to save for my own home. On a teacher's salary, my mother laughed lightly, touching my hand in what she probably thought was sympathy. Darling, be realistic. My father didn't even look up from his plate. If you'd chosen a real career, you wouldn't need to save. You'd already have a home like your siblings. I left early that night, driving back to my tiny apartment with tears blurring my vision. But somewhere between my parents' house and my humble home, those tears crystallized into determination. I would buy a house. Not a mansion like my parents, not a status symbol like Jessica's, but a real home that I earned through my own hard work. And one day they would have to acknowledge my achievement, even if it didn't fit their narrow definition of success. What I didn't realize then was how that determination would be tested over the next decade, or how deeply the roots of family approval ran through my heart. All I knew was that I had a goal, and for the first time in my life, I didn't care if the Andersons thought it was worthy. The saving journey began the very next day after that Thanksgiving. I woke up in my tiny apartment, made a cup of instant coffee, and created a spreadsheet that would become my roadmap for the next decade. A teacher's salary in our district wasn't terrible, but it certainly wasn't enough to quickly save for a down payment in even a modest neighborhood. The median home price was about $220,000, meaning I'd need at least $44,000 for a 20% down payment plus closing costs and an emergency fund. Looking at my monthly take-home pay of $2,800, with $950 going to rent, $300 to student loans and other basic expenses, I calculated I could reasonably save about $500 per month. That meant 88 months, or over 7 years of saving, assuming nothing went wrong and housing prices didn't rise. I needed to accelerate the process. The next week, I approached the school principal about tutoring opportunities. Soon, I was staying after school 3 days a week, working with struggling students for an additional $200 weekly. On weekends, I picked up private tutoring gigs for families who could afford $50 an hour for personalized education. These sessions often ran long into Sunday evenings, cutting into my lesson planning time for my actual job, which meant staying up late to prepare for my regular classes. My wardrobe became functional rather than fashionable. While other teachers updated their clothes each season, I stretched the same professional outfits year after year, becoming an expert at swapping accessories to create the illusion of variety. My one indulgence was quality shoes, since I spent hours on my feet and couldn't afford doctor's bills from poor support. Lunch was always packed from home, typically a sandwich and whatever fruit was on sale that week. I watched colleagues grab takeout or join group orders from local restaurants, always declining with a simple, "I brought lunch today, thanks." My ancient flip phone became a running joke in the teacher's lounge as smartphones became ubiquitous. "How do you even text on that thing?" younger teachers would ask, genuinely baffled. I'd demonstrate the triple-tap texting method with exaggerated patience, turning my outdated technology into a quirky personality trait rather than a financial necessity. Vacations meant staying home, deep cleaning my apartment, and maybe treating myself to a new book or rental movie. When my college friends planned a trip to Cancun for our 5-year reunion, I crafted a detailed excuse about professional development opportunities that same week. The truth was, that trip would have cost 2 months of savings, and I couldn't justify it. Instead, I spent that week painting an accent wall in my apartment, a small luxury that cost me just $30 in supplies, but made my rental feel a bit more like mine. The sacrifices were constant and cumulative. I missed destination weddings, concert tours, restaurant openings, and shopping trips. With each invitation declined, my circle of friends naturally narrowed to those who understood or shared my financial constraints. My one consistent supporter was Danielle Taylor, my best friend since college. Unlike most of our peers who drifted apart after graduation, Danielle and I maintained our friendship through weekly phone calls and budget-friendly coffee dates. "You're the most disciplined person I know," she told me once after I explained why I couldn't join a group ski trip. "When you finally get that house, I'm going to throw you the biggest housewarming party ever." Her confidence bolstered me during the inevitable moments of doubt, like when my car needed $2,000 in repairs during year 3 of my saving journey, or when a pipe burst in my apartment during year 5, ruining clothes and books I couldn't afford to replace. To stay motivated, I created a vision board above my bed. It wasn't filled with pictures of mansions or luxury homes, but modest houses with character, a craftsman bungalow with a reading nook, a mid-century ranch with large windows, a simple colonial with a welcoming front porch. I added images of garden spaces, cozy living rooms, and kitchen gatherings, visual reminders of why I was sacrificing in the present. Beside my vision board hung a special savings tracker, where each $1,000 milestone was marked with a small house icon I colored in with markers. This childlike reward system became a sacred ritual, each colored house representing approximately 2 months of disciplined saving and extra work. I kept my progress largely secret from my family. During obligatory holiday gatherings, I deflected questions about my financial situation with vague assurances that I was doing fine, and quickly redirected conversations to safer topics. The physical toll of working essentially 2 jobs became evident around year 6. Dark circles became a permanent feature under my eyes, and I caught every cold that swept through my classroom. My doctor gently suggested I consider reducing my workload after my blood pressure readings crept up. "It's temporary," I assured her, though 6 years hadn't felt temporary at all. By year 8, housing prices in our area had increased by almost 15%, forcing me to adjust my savings goal upward and extend my timeline. I considered giving up, perhaps accepting that modest apartment living was my fate, or worse, calling my father to accept his conditional help. Instead, I increased my tutoring rates by $10 per hour and added one more private student to my weekend schedule. My social life dwindled to nearly nothing, but my savings account continued its slow, steady climb. In that 8th year, I began supplementing my income through Teachers Pay Teachers, selling my original curriculum materials online to educators across the country. What started as a few worksheet packets eventually grew into a meaningful income stream, adding an extra $300, $400 monthly to my savings. During these years, I also invested time in learning practical skills that would reduce future homeownership costs. I took free community workshops on basic plumbing repairs, tile work, and furniture restoration. My apartment became a laboratory for small DIY projects, much to my landlord's mixed approval. The 9th year tested my resolve in unexpected ways. My sister Jessica announced her engagement to a neurosurgeon, and the wedding planning consumed our family dynamics for months. My mother called weekly with updates about venue costs and flower arrangements that exceeded my annual salary. When asked to be a bridesmaid, I quietly calculated the expected expenses: designer dress, professional hair and makeup, extravagant bachelorette weekend, and gifts for multiple pre-wedding events. The total would set my house fund back by nearly 3 months. I agreed anyway, unwilling to create family drama that would make Jessica's wedding about my financial choices. Those 3 months felt like an eternity to recover, but by the beginning of year 10, I had reached a significant milestone: $40,000 in savings specifically earmarked for my home purchase. With just a few more months of aggressive saving, I would reach my adjusted goal of $50,000, accounting for the increased housing market and necessary closing costs. The final push was both the hardest and the easiest. Hard because a decade of sacrifice had left me bone-tired, easy because I could finally see the finish line. I took on additional private tutoring during summer break, working with students preparing for college entrance exams, and by September, exactly 10 years after starting my journey, I made the final deposit into my house fund, $52,673. That night I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the same secondhand furniture I'd acquired a decade earlier, looking at my fully colored savings tracker and my faded vision board. The emotion that washed over me wasn't purely joy as I'd expected, but a complex mixture of pride, anxiety, and a question that had lingered unspoken for years. Would it finally be enough to make my family proud? The next day, I contacted a mortgage broker to begin the pre-approval process, taking the first tangible step toward turning my decade of sacrifice into something real, something mine. With my pre-approval letter clutched tightly in hand, I entered the next phase of my journey, finding the perfect home. The mortgage broker had approved me for up to $250,000, which was both exhilarating and terrifying. After a decade of tracking every penny, having access to such a sum felt almost unreal. I connected with a realtor named Sandra Thompson, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who specialized in first-time homebuyers. During our initial meeting, I explained my budget and modest requirements: 3 bedrooms, a functional kitchen, and hopefully a small backyard. "Not looking for granite countertops and walk-in closets?" she asked with a raised eyebrow. "I'm looking for good bones and a place to build a life," I replied. "The fancy stuff can come later if ever." She smiled approvingly. Refreshing attitude. Most first-timers come in with HGTV expectations and starter home budgets. Sandra set up viewings for 6 properties that weekend. The first was a new construction townhouse in a planned development. It was pristine with neutral paint laminate floors and a homeowners association that covered exterior maintenance. Everything worked perfectly, but it felt sterile, like living in a hotel room. The second property was in an established neighborhood with mature trees, but the interior had been gutted for a renovation that was never completed. While the price was tempting, Sandra gently reminded me that a major renovation would quickly exceed my budget and expertise. Properties 3 and 4 were similarly disappointing for opposite reasons, one overpriced for its condition, the other in good shape, but in a neighborhood where my car would likely be broken into weekly. By the time we pulled up to the 5th house, my excitement had dimmed considerably. Located in Mapleton, a middle-class neighborhood built in the 1970s, the modest ranch-style home sat on a corner lot with overgrown landscaping partially obscuring the view from the street. "This one's been on the market for 40 days, Sandra explained as we walked up the cracked concrete path. "The previous owners were an elderly couple who lived here for 30 years. The husband passed and the wife moved to assisted living. Their children just want a quick sale and haven't done much to improve its marketability." The front door stuck slightly when Sandra unlocked it, requiring a firm push. The entryway opened directly into a living room with outdated wood paneling and carpet that had seen better days. The kitchen featured original cabinetry and appliances that were functional but far from contemporary. The bathrooms needed updating with pink and blue tile that screamed 1970s design. But beneath the cosmetic issues, I saw potential. The house had a logical flow with 3 modestly sized bedrooms and 2 full bathrooms. Large windows allowed natural light to pour in despite the dated window treatments. The backyard, while overgrown, was spacious and featured a mature oak tree providing perfect shade. Most importantly, the home inspector found no major structural issues, just the expected wear of a house approaching its 5th decade. "What do you think?" Sandra asked, as we completed the tour. "It needs work," I admitted, "but nothing I can't handle gradually. The asking price is $230,000, but given its condition and time on market, we could offer lower," she suggested. "Maybe start at $210,000 and see where negotiations lead." I nodded, already mentally painting over the wood paneling and tearing up the carpet to see what might be underneath. This house, imperfect as it was, felt like it could become a home. We submitted the offer that evening, and I spent a restless night imagining future renovations and furniture arrangements. The next morning, Sandra called with news that tempered my excitement. "There's another offer," she explained. "The sellers are asking for best and final offers by tomorrow afternoon." My heart sank. A bidding war would likely push the price beyond my comfort zone. After consulting with Sandra, I increased my offer to $222,000, the absolute maximum I could manage, while maintaining enough reserves for immediate repairs and my emergency fund. The 24 hours that followed were among the longest of my life. I checked my phone compulsively between classes, jumping whenever it buzzed with a notification. Finally, while supervising afternoon recess, Sandra's name appeared on my screen. "Congratulations, homeowner," she announced when I answered. "They accepted your offer. The other buyer came in higher but wanted extensive repairs completed first. Your clean offer with fewer contingencies won them over." I had to turn away from the playground to hide my tears from my students. After 10 years of sacrifice and saving, I was going to be a homeowner. The closing process was a blur of paperwork inspections and insurance quotes. I signed document after document until my signature became an illegible scrawl. Throughout the process, I kept expecting to feel the presence of family beside me, despite not having informed them of my purchase yet. I watched other buyers at the title company arrive with partners, parents, or friends, all part of their significant life moment. I came alone, left alone, and celebrated with a solitary cup of coffee afterward. 30 days after my offer was accepted, I met Sandra at the property for the final walkthrough. The house was empty now, the previous owner's furnishings removed to reveal worn spots on the carpet and discolored areas on walls where pictures had hung for decades. "Everything looks in order," Sandra confirmed, as we checked that all included appliances remained and no new damage had occurred since the inspection. "Ready for closing tomorrow." "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The next day I signed the final paperwork and received a set of keys that felt impossibly heavy in my palm. Sandra congratulated me with a hug and a small housewarming gift, a welcome mat reading "Home Sweet Home." "Most important purchase of your life," she said. "You should be proud. Not everyone has the discipline to do what you did." That evening I drove to my new house, still processing that it truly belonged to me. I had arranged to continue renting my apartment for 2 more weeks while I completed some basic updates before moving in, so the house would remain empty during that time. Standing in the vacant living room as the sun set, casting long shadows across the worn carpet, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and loneliness. I'd achieved what many considered impossible on a teacher's salary in today's economy, yet there was no one there to witness it. I spread out a sleeping bag in what would become my bedroom and spent that first night on the floor simultaneously exhausted and too excited to sleep. Every creak and settling noise startled me, the house introducing itself through its unique symphony of sounds. The next 2 weeks were a flurry of activity as I used every available hour outside of school to begin transformations. I tore up the carpet in the living room and hallway, delighted to find hardwood floors underneath that needed refinishing but were otherwise intact. I painted over the wood paneling with a warm cream color that immediately modernized the space. The kitchen cabinets received a coat of white paint and new hardware, a budget-friendly update that made a significant difference. Each improvement, however small, felt like claiming the space as my own. I tackled projects in order of necessity, rather than preference, focusing on making the house livable before making it beautiful. The satisfaction of seeing my vision slowly materialize sustained me through exhausting days of teaching followed by evenings of home improvement. By the end of those 2 weeks, I had created a functional, if not fully finished space. My modest furniture from the apartment looked almost comically small in the larger rooms, but I reminded myself that filling the house would be a gradual process, just like paying for it had been. On moving day, Danielle and 2 other teacher friends helped transport my belongings from the apartment to the house. Their exclamations of approval with each revealed renovation bolstered my confidence. "Lauren, this is amazing," Danielle marveled as she helped arrange my bedroom. "I can't believe what you've done already. Your family is going to be so impressed when they see it." Her words triggered the thought I'd been avoiding. It was time to share my achievement with my family. Despite our complicated relationship, I wanted them to see what I had accomplished. Perhaps this tangible evidence of my success would finally earn their approval in a way my career never had. That evening, after my friends had left, and I was truly alone in my new home, I composed a group text to my parents and siblings. "I have some exciting news to share. I've purchased my first home. I'd love for you all to see it once I'm settled. Planning a housewarming party soon, and hope you can attend." The responses were predictably varied. Jessica sent an immediate, Congrats, can't wait to see it. That felt genuinely enthusiastic. Aaron replied with a more reserved, good for you. My mother asked for the address and neighborhood questions I knew were aimed at assessing the home's status value, rather than expressing interest in my achievement. My father didn't respond at all. Nevertheless, I began planning my housewarming party with renewed determination. This would be the moment my family finally saw me as successful on my own terms. The house would be perfectly presented, the gathering impeccably hosted. They would have to acknowledge that I had accomplished something significant even if it didn't align with their definition of achievement. What I didn't yet realize was how deeply I still tied my sense of worth to their approval, or how painfully that connection would be severed in the coming weeks. With 3 weeks until my housewarming party, I threw myself into preparations with the same intensity that had characterized my decade-long saving journey. This event had transformed in my mind from a simple celebration to a pivotal moment when my family would finally recognize my achievement. I created a detailed timeline for completing house projects, prioritizing the areas guests would see most. The living room and dining space were nearly complete, with freshly refinished hardwood floors and walls painted in warm, inviting colors. The kitchen still needed work, but new cabinet hardware and a fresh coat of paint had already made a significant difference. The bathrooms required more attention. I spent an entire weekend removing the dated blue and pink tile, installing simple white subway tile in its place. The process was messier and more time-consuming than YouTube tutorials had suggested, but the modern result was worth the effort. For decorations, I scoured clearance sections and thrift stores, developing an eye for pieces that looked more expensive than they were. A large mirror with an ornate frame discovered at a garage sale for just $30 became the focal point of my entryway after I refinished it with gold spray paint. Strategically placed lamps created warm lighting that softened the spaces still awaiting updates. I created a detailed shopping list for the party itself, allocating more of my budget to food and drinks than I typically allowed for any expense. This wasn't the time for frugality, not when impressions mattered so much. I planned a menu that was sophisticated yet homey: a charcuterie board with imported cheeses, homemade spinach, artichoke dip mini quiches, and a signature cocktail I named New Beginnings. 20 invitations were created by hand, each one personalized for its recipient. For friends and colleagues, I highlighted features I knew they'd appreciate, like the reading nook I'd created in the spare bedroom, or the backyard perfect for summer gatherings. For family members, I emphasized the home's investment value, the desirable school district, and the potential for appreciation, speaking the language I knew would resonate with them. My parents' invitation received special attention. I included professional quality photos of the most finished areas of the house, carefully staged to showcase its potential. I mentioned the solid construction, the corner lot, and the fact that I'd purchased below market value details I hoped my father would appreciate from a business perspective. "I'd be honored if you could attend," I wrote in a personal note. "This milestone wouldn't have been possible without the values of hard work and perseverance you instilled in me." It wasn't entirely true, but it offered an olive branch, a way for them to take some credit for my achievement, even though they'd never supported this particular goal. As the party approached, I practiced what I would say during the house tour, crafting a narrative that emphasized the smart investment while downplaying the areas still needing work. I rehearsed responses to potential criticisms, particularly from my mother, who I knew would notice every imperfection. "Yes, the kitchen is next on my renovation list," I practiced saying casually. "I'm getting quotes from contractors next month." In reality, I planned to tackle the kitchen myself over summer break, but they didn't need to know that. I purchased a new outfit specifically for the occasion, a blue dress that projected casual confidence without appearing to try too hard. It cost more than I typically spent on clothing, but I justified it as part of the presentation. First impressions mattered, and this would be my family's first impression of me as a homeowner. The day before the party, Danielle came over to help with final preparations. We deep cleaned every surface, arranged flowers in strategic locations, and set up the dining table with my grandmother's china borrowed from my mother months earlier under the pretense of hosting a dinner for fellow teachers. "It looks amazing, Lauren," Danielle assured me as we stood back to assess our work. Everyone's going to be impressed. I nodded, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety that had formed in my stomach. Have you heard from anyone else about tomorrow? Danielle hesitated before answering. A few people mentioned they might be running late. Traffic from the city can be unpredictable on Saturdays. I'd chosen a Saturday afternoon for the gathering, timing it when I knew my family had no standing engagements. The party was scheduled to start at 3, allowing plenty of time for people to arrive and tour the house before dinner at 5. That morning, I woke at dawn after a fitful night's sleep. I spent hours on final touches, adjusting picture frames to perfect angles and rearranging the charcuterie board 3 times until it looked effortlessly abundant. I prepared a signature scent for the house by simmering cinnamon sticks and orange peels, a trick learned from a home staging article. By 2 o'clock, everything was ready. The food was prepared, drinks were chilling, music was playing softly through the house, and I was dressed and ready to greet my guests. I had even prepared a guest book for visitors to sign a symbolic record of the first gathering in my new home. At 2:30, I received a text from a colleague claiming a sick child would prevent her attendance. "So sorry to miss it," she wrote. "Can't wait to see it another time." By 2:45, 3 more cancellations had arrived, each with a different but equally vague excuse. Still, I wasn't worried. The most important guests, my family, hadn't sent any cancellations, and Danielle had promised to arrive early to help welcome people. At 2:50, my phone rang. It was Danielle. "Lauren, I'm so sorry," she began, her voice strained. "My car broke down on the highway. I'm waiting for a tow truck now. I'll try to get there as soon as I can, but it might be a few hours." My stomach dropped, but I maintained an upbeat tone. "Don't worry about it. Just take care of your car and get here when you can." As 3 o'clock arrived, I positioned myself near the front window, watching the street for approaching cars. None turned into my driveway. I checked my phone repeatedly, finding no new messages. By 3:15, I sent a group text to my family, "Looking forward to seeing everyone soon. Food's ready whenever you arrive." Jessica replied quickly, "Running a bit late, start without me." That message gave me hope. At least one family member was still planning to attend. I busied myself with unnecessary adjustments to the food display, trying to ignore the passing time. At 3:30, I called my brother Aaron. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a cheerful message asking if he was on his way, careful to keep any anxiety from my voice. By 4 o'clock, no one had arrived. The ice on the drinks was melting and the carefully arranged food was losing its fresh appearance. I sent another text to my parents, trying to sound casual. "Did you need directions to the house?" There was no immediate response. I paced the living room, alternating between watching the window and checking my phone. Perhaps there was a major traffic incident I hadn't heard about. Perhaps everyone was running late but still coming. At 4:15, I received the text message that would forever change my relationship with my family. It came from my mother's phone, but I could hear my father's influence in every word. "Don't expect us to come. Your house isn't worth the drive. Maybe when you can afford something in our neighborhood, we'll celebrate. Dad agrees." The phone slipped from my hand, clattering on the hardwood floor I had so painstakingly refinished. The physical pain in my chest was immediate and overwhelming, as if something had been torn from inside me. Before I could process this first blow, more messages arrived. From Aaron. "Got caught up with work. Rain check." From Jessica, who had previously indicated she was coming. "Luke surprised me with dinner reservations. So sorry to miss your little party. Send pics." I stood frozen in my empty dining room, the table set for guests who would never arrive. The silence of the house pressed in around me, broken only by the cheerful playlist I had carefully curated, now an ironic soundtrack to my humiliation. The realization settled over me like a physical weight. No one was coming. Not a single person would witness the culmination of my 10-year journey. The home I had sacrificed so much to create would host no celebration, receive no admiration, generate no memories of shared joy. I moved mechanically to the kitchen, turning off the warming trays. I covered the untouched food with plastic wrap, though I knew I wouldn't be able to eat any of it later. Each action was performed with detached precision, as if following a cleanup checklist after a successful event rather than a gathering that never happened. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my empty living room, I sat alone at my fully set dining table. The candles I had placed as centerpieces remained unlit. The name cards for each guest marked places that would remain empty. I don't know how long I sat there staring at nothing. When I finally moved, it was to retrieve my phone from the floor. The screen had cracked when I dropped it, a fitting metaphor for how I felt inside. I scrolled through the messages again, my mother's words, cutting freshly with each reading. "Your house isn't worth the drive." 5 words that dismissed not just my home, but the decade of work it represented. As darkness fell completely, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not delicate tears, but gut-wrenching sobs that echoed through the empty rooms. I cried for the little girl who had always sought approval and never quite found it. I cried for the young woman who had worked 2 jobs for years believing achievement would finally bring acceptance. I cried for my present self sitting alone surrounded by evidence of a celebration that would never happen. When the tears finally subsided, I blew out the candles I had eventually lit more for myself than for non-existent guests. I made my way to the couch, unable to face my bedroom with its cheerfully arranged pillows and fresh linens chosen specifically to create a magazine-worthy master suite. I slept fitfully on the couch, still wearing my carefully selected dress. The sound of the house settling around me, now feeling less like a home introducing itself and more like the whispers of failure. Morning arrived with harsh sunlight streaming through windows I hadn't bothered to close the night before. The remnants of my planned celebration lay untouched throughout the house, a monument to expectations shattered. In the harsh light of day, surrounded by the physical evidence of my rejection, I felt something beyond the hurt. A hollow sense of realization that despite owning these walls and this roof, I had never felt more homeless. The week following my failed housewarming party was a blur of mechanical existence. I went to work, taught my classes, and returned home each evening to a house that still bore evidence of the celebration that never happened. The guest book remained empty on the entryway table, a silent testament to my humiliation. I couldn't bring myself to respond to any of the cancellation messages, nor did I acknowledge my mother's cruel text. The cracked screen of my phone served as a constant reminder every time I looked at it, but I couldn't justify the expense of repairing it when the damage was merely cosmetic. By Wednesday evening, I had managed to put away most of the party supplies, though the refrigerator remained full of untouched food I couldn't stomach eating. I sat on my couch surrounded by half-unpacked moving boxes. I'd lost the motivation to address questioning every decision that had led me to this moment. Maybe my parents had been right all along. Maybe teaching wasn't a real career, and this modest house wasn't a real achievement. Maybe I had spent a decade chasing a definition of success that would never align with my family's values, foolishly believing that tangible proof would somehow bridge that fundamental gap. The ringing of the doorbell startled me from my spiral of self-doubt. For a moment, my heart leapt with irrational hope that perhaps it was family arriving, belatedly having reconsidered their absence. I quickly smoothed my hair and clothes before opening the door. Instead of family, I found an older woman with silver hair and a warm smile holding a small basket. "Hello there," she greeted me cheerfully. "I'm Margaret Wilson from next door. I noticed you moving in last week and wanted to properly welcome you to the neighborhood." The simple kindness of the gesture left me momentarily speechless. Margaret didn't seem to notice, continuing her friendly introduction as she handed me the basket containing homemade muffins, local coffee, and a handwritten card. "We've lived here for 40 years, so I know just about everything worth knowing about Mapleton," she explained, "including which plumbers won't overcharge and which trees tend to drop limbs in storms." I invited her in, hastily clearing books from an armchair to offer her a seat. As we chatted over impromptu coffee, I found myself relaxing for the first time in days. Margaret asked thoughtful questions about my teaching career, showing genuine interest in my work with elementary students. She didn't ask about my family or why a single woman would purchase a 3-bedroom house, topics that inevitably led to explaining my complicated family dynamics. After she left, promising to introduce me to other neighbors soon, I felt a small shift in my perspective. Perhaps worth wasn't solely determined by those who shared my DNA. Perhaps it could also be found in unexpected connections with strangers who became neighbors, or neighbors who might become friends. The following day, a similar unexpected moment of connection occurred at school. Maria Gonzalez, a fellow teacher I knew only casually, approached me in the faculty lounge. "I heard you bought a house," she said, placing a small gift bag on the table. "I'm so sorry I couldn't make your housewarming. My mother had a health scare that day." I hadn't even invited Maria, realizing with some embarrassment that she must have heard about the party from other colleagues. "It's a just little something," she continued, gesturing to the bag. "Every new home needs a plant, right?" Inside was a small potted succulent with a card reading, "May you grow roots as strong as this little guy." These small kindnesses continued to appear in unexpected ways. The principal mentioned my home purchase during a staff meeting, congratulating me publicly on achieving the American dream on a teacher's salary, in a way that made me feel genuinely accomplished rather than defensive about my modest purchase. 2 weeks after the failed housewarming, I ran into Sandra, my realtor, at the local hardware store, where I was comparing paint samples for the guest bathroom. "Lauren," she exclaimed, genuinely pleased to see me. "How's the house treating you?" I gave her the abbreviated version of my ongoing projects, carefully avoiding any mention of the housewarming disaster. Sandra listened attentively, offering practical advice about which home improvements typically yielded the best return on investment. "You know," she said as we were parting, "there's a first-time homeowners group that meets monthly at the community center, mostly people sharing renovation tips and contractor recommendations. You should come to the next meeting. I think you'd fit right in." The invitation sparked something in me, a reminder that I was part of a community of people who had made similar choices and faced similar challenges. People who would understand the significance of what I had accomplished without measuring it against the Anderson family yardstick. That evening, standing in my backyard beneath the old oak tree, I made a decision that would ultimately become my turning point. The overgrown yard, which I had viewed as a low-priority project to be tackled someday, suddenly seemed like the perfect place to channel my emotions. I spent that weekend researching basic landscape design, watching YouTube tutorials on creating outdoor living spaces on a budget, and sketching plans for transforming the neglected space into something beautiful and welcoming. What began as a distraction quickly evolved into a passion project. Each evening after school, I would spend an hour or two in the yard clearing overgrowth, defining garden beds, and preparing the ground for what I envisioned as a gathering space centered around the magnificent oak. The physical labor was therapeutic, allowing me to process my hurt and disappointment through productive action. With each root I dug up, I felt like I was also extracting the deeply buried need for family approval that had driven me for so long. As the backyard transformation progressed, I began to avoid my family's calls and texts with increasing deliberateness. My mother's messages shifted from indifferent to concerned to irritated as weeks passed without response. My father predictably never called directly but had my mother inquire about my unusual silence. I wasn't ready to confront them yet, not until I had processed my own feelings about what had happened. Instead, I focused on building new connections. I attended the homeowners group Sandra had recommended, where I met other first-time buyers facing similar challenges with older homes and limited budgets. Among them was Jason Ramirez, a firefighter, who had purchased a similar ranch-style home just a few streets over. He offered to help me install ceiling fans in exchange for assistance painting his living room, a barter system that benefited us both financially and created a foundation for friendship. Through the group, I also connected with Trisha Winters, a landscape designer who offered free consultations to homeowners willing to do the physical labor themselves. Her professional advice elevated my backyard project from amateur to impressive, and her encouragement kept me motivated through the challenging aspects of the transformation. 6 weeks after the housewarming that never happened, I received an unexpected text from my older brother, Aaron. "Mom and Dad are concerned. Call them." Instead of complying, I called my therapist, Dr. Bennett, whom I had begun seeing shortly after the housewarming disaster. She had been helping me establish healthier boundaries with my family and recognize patterns of seeking external validation. "I think it's time," she said after listening to me read Aaron's message. "You've done good work processing your feelings. Now you need to decide what kind of relationship you want with your family moving forward, if any." That evening, I sat in my partially renovated backyard, the setting sun filtering through oak leaves, creating dappled patterns across the new flagstone patio I had painstakingly installed. With a deep breath, I called my mother. Her voice, when she answered, was a mixture of relief and irritation. "Lauren, finally. We've been worried sick." "I've been busy," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "Working on my house." "Well, you could have called. Your father has been concerned." The old Lauren would have apologized, immediately accepting responsibility for their worry, while ignoring the fact that they had been the ones to hurt me. The new homeowner Lauren took another approach. "I needed some space after what happened with the housewarming," I said directly. "Your text really hurt me, Mom." There was a pause, then a defensive response. "I was just being honest, Lauren. That neighborhood isn't somewhere we typically go, and your father had an important meeting that day." "You said my house wasn't worth the drive," I reminded her, my voice catching slightly. "Do you have any idea how that made me feel? After 10 years of saving and working 2 jobs?" "You're being oversensitive," she deflected. "We've always been supportive of your choices." The blatant revision of history might have made me question my own memories in the past. Now it just reinforced my resolve. "No, Mom. You've been supportive of choices that align with your values. When I've made different choices, you've been dismissive at best and cruel at worst." The conversation continued in this vein, my mother alternating between defensive justification and attempts to change the subject. I held firm, calmly stating how her words and actions had affected me without yielding to her narrative that I was simply being dramatic. By the end of the call, nothing had been truly resolved, but something fundamental had shifted. I had spoken my truth without seeking approval or trying to earn love through achievement. It was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. The following weekend brought another surprise. I was installing solar-powered landscape lighting along my new garden path when a familiar black Mercedes pulled into my driveway. My father emerged looking distinctly uncomfortable in such a modest neighborhood. "Your mother said you bought a house," he stated without greeting, his eyes scanning the exterior with obvious judgment. "I did," I replied, not moving to invite him in. 10 months ago, actually." He shifted uncomfortably. "Going to show me inside, or are we having this conversation in the yard?" I led him through the front door, suddenly seeing my home through his critical eyes. The renovations I had completed with such pride would appear amateur to him. The furniture I had carefully selected would seem cheap and basic compared to the designer pieces that filled their home. To my surprise, he said little as I gave him a brief tour, noting only that the hardwood floors had potential, and the corner lot was a smart choice for resale value. In the kitchen, he finally spoke directly about the elephant in the room. "Your mother is upset about your phone call. Says you accused us of not supporting you." I leaned against the counter, meeting his gaze directly. "I stated facts, Dad. You've never supported my career choice. You've compared me unfavorably to Aaron and Jessica my entire life, and neither of you showed up for one of the most important days of my life." He frowned, glancing around the modest kitchen with its painted cabinets and budget countertops. "This is what you consider one of the most important days of your life, Lauren. It's a starter home in a mediocre neighborhood." "It's my home," I corrected him. "That I earned and purchased myself after a decade of saving. And yes, that makes it important to me, even if it doesn't meet your standards." My father sighed heavily, running a hand through his silver hair. "I suppose you didn't do too badly," he conceded reluctantly. "The structure seems sound, and property in this area will likely appreciate over time." Coming from Thomas Anderson, this qualified as effusive praise. I accepted it with a nod, neither seeking more nor dismissing what must have been difficult for him to offer. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the front door. "Jessica's birthday dinner is next weekend at La Maison. Your mother expects you to be there." It wasn't an apology or even an acknowledgement of how they had hurt me. but it was in his way an olive branch, an invitation back into the family fold without requiring him to admit wrongdoing. The old Lauren would have accepted, gratefully eager to smooth things over and regain approval. The homeowner Lauren took a different approach. "I'll think about it," I replied simply. "I have plans for working on my backyard that weekend." His eyebrows rose slightly at my non-committal response, but he nodded and left without further comment. As I watched his luxury car pull away from my modest home, I felt no triumph or vindication, just a quiet certainty that I was finally establishing boundaries that should have been in place years ago. The foundations I was building extended beyond the physical structure of my house to the framework of my relationships and sense of self-worth. That evening, as I continued installing the garden lights that would illuminate the path I had created with my own hands, I decided it was time to try again, not to seek family approval, to celebrate with the people who had shown genuine support and interest in my journey. I would host a second gathering, but this time with no expectations beyond sharing my space with those who valued me for exactly who I was, not who they thought I should be. A housewarming not to impress, but to connect. Not to prove my worth, but to share my joy. I approached my second chance gathering with an entirely different mindset than my first attempt. This wasn't about impressing anyone or seeking validation. It was about genuine connection and celebration with people who had shown me what true support looked like. The guest list was smaller and notably different. I invited Margaret from next door and asked her to extend the invitation to other neighbors she thought I should meet. Maria from school and a few other teachers who had expressed genuine interest in my home purchase made the list. Sandra and several members of the homeowners group were included, as was Jason, who had helped with various projects around the house. Danielle, despite her car troubles during the first gathering, remained my closest friend and took charge of coordinating refreshments. This time we planned a casual potluck rather than the elaborate spread I had prepared before removing the pressure of perfect hosting and emphasizing community contribution. Most significantly, I did not invite my family. It wasn't out of spite or anger, but from the recognition that I needed this experience to be free from the weight of their expectations and judgments. I needed to celebrate this achievement on my own terms, surrounded by people who understood its significance. The morning of the gathering, I felt none of the anxious perfectionism that had characterized my preparations for the first party. I didn't rearrange furniture multiple times or obsess over the positioning of decorative items. Instead, I focused on making my home welcoming rather than impressive. The backyard, which had become my healing project, was finally ready to showcase. String lights hung from the branches of the oak tree, illuminating the flagstone patio below. Container gardens filled with colorful flowers lined the edges of the space, and comfortable seating arranged in conversational groupings invited people to linger. When guests began arriving promptly at the scheduled time, each bringing food and small housewarming gifts, the contrast with my previous experience was striking. These people came not out of obligation or to judge my success, but because they genuinely wanted to celebrate with me. Margaret arrived first, bringing 2 other couples from the neighborhood who welcomed me warmly and immediately began sharing stories about the history of the area. Maria came with her husband and children, who politely asked if they could see my teacher space guy, the small office I had set up in the 3rd bedroom. Sandra brought a practical gift of local service provider recommendations, all personally vetted through her years in real estate. As the gathering progressed, my home filled with conversation and laughter that felt authentic rather than performative. People mingled easily, connecting over shared experiences of first-time homeownership or neighborhood events. When Jason asked about my backyard transformation, I gave an impromptu tour to several interested guests, receiving genuine compliments on work I had completed myself. "You've done more with this yard in a few months than the previous owners did in decades," Margaret observed admiringly. "This house needed someone like you, someone who could see its potential." Her words touched me deeply, acknowledging not just my physical labor, but my vision and commitment. This was the recognition I had sought from my family, offered freely by someone who barely knew me, but could appreciate the value of what I had created. Throughout the evening, I found myself having meaningful conversations about topics ranging from sustainable gardening to the challenges of working in education. Not once did I feel the need to justify my career choice or defend the modesty of my home. These people accepted me as I was teacher and homeowner, neither exceptional nor lacking but simply authentic. As the gathering wound down naturally with guests lingering on the patio in the warm evening air, I experienced a sense of contentment that had eluded me during years of seeking family approval. This was what home truly meant, not a showcase of achievement or a bid for validation, but a space where genuine connection could flourish. The success of this gathering marked a turning point in my relationship with my home and myself. I stopped viewing the house as a statement to prove my worth and began seeing it as a canvas for creating the life I wanted regardless of others' opinions. In the months that followed, my home truly became my sanctuary. I continued renovation projects at a pace that brought joy rather than exhaustion, celebrating small victories, like installing new bathroom fixtures, or finally finding the perfect dining table at an estate sale. My relationship with my family evolved slowly. I did attend Jessica's birthday dinner, arriving on my terms and leaving when I felt ready rather than waiting for parental approval to depart. I shared photos of my completed projects when asked, but didn't seek their validation of my choices. When my mother made subtle digs about the neighborhood or the size of my home, I let the comments slide past without internalizing them. 6 months after purchasing my house, our neighborhood organized a summer block party with different homes hosting various aspects of the celebration. I volunteered my backyard for the dessert station, proud to share the space I had transformed with my wider community. The party was in full swing when I noticed a familiar car pulling up across the street. My sister Jessica stepped out, looking somewhat out of place in her designer sundress among the casually dressed neighbors. "Hope I'm not intruding," she said when she found me by the dessert table. "Mom mentioned you were hosting some neighborhood thing and I was curious." I welcomed her genuinely, offering a tour of the house and introductions to my neighbors. As we walked through my home, now fully settled and reflecting my personality in every room, I watched her expression shift from polite interest to genuine appreciation. "It's really lovely, Lauren," she admitted as we stood in the backyard watching children play under the oak tree. "It's so peaceful. I can see why you love it here." "Thanks, Jess. That means a lot." "I should have come to your housewarming," she said quietly. "I'm sorry I didn't." Her apology, simple as it was, acknowledged the hurt I had experienced in a way my parents never had. I accepted it with a nod and offered her a plate of homemade cookies, turning the conversation to lighter topics. Jessica stayed for over an hour, mingling with my neighbors and even exchanging phone numbers with Margaret, who shared her interest in gardening. When she left, something had shifted subtly between us, a new respect that had never been present in our relationship before. The 1-year anniversary of my home purchase arrived in early autumn. I celebrated quietly by planting a young maple tree in the front yard, a symbol of putting down roots and future growth. As I patted soil around its base, I reflected on everything that had changed since receiving those house keys. Financially, my investment was already proving sound, with property values in the neighborhood rising steadily. Professionally, I had leveraged my homeownership experience into a financial literacy unit for my 5th grade students, teaching them basic principles of saving and investing that I wished I had learned earlier. Most significantly, I had started a monthly workshop at the community center for first-time homebuyers, particularly those in education and other modestly paying professions. The Teachers Can Own Too program combined practical advice on saving strategies with basic home maintenance skills, empowering others to follow a similar path to mine. In one of life's more ironic twists, my father sent a belated housewarming gift on the 1-year anniversary, a set of professional-grade garden tools with a brief note reading, "For your backyard projects, Dad." It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, and from Thomas Anderson that meant something. I used those tools to continue expanding my garden, creating a vegetable plot that produced enough to share with neighbors and colleagues. Each harvest reminded me that patience and consistent effort yielded results in gardening as in life. As my second holiday season as a homeowner approached, I made a bold decision. I would host Thanksgiving dinner and invite both my chosen family of friends and my biological family. It would be the first time these worlds would collide, and the prospect was both exciting and terrifying. When the day arrived, my home was prepared but not perfect. I had cleaned thoroughly, but hadn't obsessed over every detail. The menu included both traditional family recipes and new dishes contributed by friends. The table was extended to its full length, set with a mixture of my grandmother's china and more casual pieces acquired from thrift stores. Danielle and Jason arrived first, helping with final preparations. My neighbors came next, bringing side dishes and comfortable conversation. When my parents' car pulled into the driveway, followed shortly by Aaron's and then Jessica's, I felt a moment of panic. Would they judge this gathering against their own elaborate holiday traditions? Would they make my friends feel uncomfortable with their formality? To my surprise, the gathering found its own rhythm. My father engaged Jason in a lengthy discussion about property values and home improvements, offering advice that was actually useful rather than critical. My mother, after an initial period of obvious discomfort, found common ground with Margaret over garden design. Aaron relaxed more than I had seen in years, playing board games with Maria's children and laughing genuinely. As we gathered around the table, biological family interspersed with chosen family, I realized I had created something my parents, with all their wealth and status, had never quite managed: a home where people felt genuinely welcome rather than impressed, connected rather than evaluated. When Jessica raised her glass for an impromptu toast, the words she chose captured perfectly the journey I had undergone. "To Lauren," she said, "who taught us all that home isn't about the address or the square footage, but about creating a place where people feel valued for exactly who they are." The murmured agreement from around the table, from people who represented such different parts of my life, felt like the true housewarming I had been seeking all along. Later that evening, as the gathering continued with dessert and coffee in the living room, I stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. Standing on my front porch, looking at the modest house that had become the catalyst for so much personal growth, I finally understood the truth that had eluded me for so long. The foundation I had been building wasn't just made of concrete and lumber, but of self-worth that existed independently of external validation. The walls weren't just sheetrock and paint, but boundaries that protected my right to define success on my own terms. And the door wasn't just wood and hinges, but my power to choose who to welcome into my life and on what conditions. In seeking a house, I had found a home not just within these walls, but within myself. And that was an achievement worth celebrating, whether anyone else recognized it or not. Have you ever had to redefine success on your own terms when others couldn't see the value in your achievements? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in unexpected places. Remember, sometimes the most important foundations we build are the ones within ourselves. Thank you for listening, and may you always find home wherever you are.